Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Mike Kuczkowski, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from New York. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the most crucial leadership skills for the next decade. We're in dynamic times. It's complex, it's messy. Things are changing rapidly. We're in the age of AI, geopolitically, socially, economically, like it's a mess out there, right? Things are changing rapidly. And so what are we going to need from our leaders in our organizations, not just to be successful today, but leading into the next decade? That's what we're going to be discussing today. I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. As we get started, I wanted to share Mike's bio with everybody. Mike Kuczkowski is the founder and CEO of Orange Fiery, a strategy consulting and communications firm with 30 years of experience in journalism, politics, public relations, and management consulting. Mike believes in the power of integrating strategy and communications to drive success. He's passionate about helping clients solve complex problems with curiosity, rigor, and collaboration. I love all of that. And I love kind of the interdisciplinary kind of way that you go about your work in your firm, because we need to cross silos. We need to tackle the most complex, challenging problems from multiple frames and lenses, I think. And I'm always skeptical when consulting firms go in with like their preconceived set model of like how you fix everything. I'm like, that doesn't work. That never works. you always have to go in and look at things from a more nuanced perspective, because if it was easy to fix complex problems, they would have already been fixed, right? That's why they're messy and hard, because they're not easy to fix. So anyways, I applaud you for the good work that you do. Anything you would like to add by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, I mean, I guess the interdisciplinary piece comes in a path of my career path. I started as a journalist. I did that for about 6 years at various daily and then weekly publications. I jumped over into politics for a couple of years. That sort of counts usually as dog years because it was very intense. But I was the mayor's press secretary and communications director in New Haven, Connecticut for a couple of years. And then I've been in public relations consulting, communications consulting, and management consulting for the past 25. So, that aspect, I think it's funny because the market seems to have evolved a bit, where the expectation, to your point about management consulting, is not that they'll just come and pull some wisdom off the shelf and apply it to the problem at hand, but that they'll actually also care about the implementation piece. And we've been caring about that from the outset. I actually think in many respects, my experience of it, I started out in public relations not knowing that a lot of what's taught in the academic side of PR is not what's actually out in the marketplace. So you wind up with training and stuff that tells you it's about audience insights, and you have to create programming that tries to move the needle, that you should always measure stuff. And then you get out there and you're like, no, we launch a media relations program. That's what our clients expect. So I was always kind of, scratching my way upstream, and I wound up working for Pfizer as on a project that our Washington, D.C. office had won at the firm that I worked at. And it was such a different dynamic being sort of, I was in-house kind of because I was, working with them on a day in, day out basis. I got to see their thinking, the critical questions that they asked, the cross-functional ways that they tried to bring people together. And it just was like such a natural fit for me. So that helped me a lot in terms of trying to create what we've created here.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. Love to hear that. And again, love what you're doing. Now, as we dive on in to the broader conversation today, maybe you can just lay out kind of in really broad general terms, kind of your take on I mean, this is almost a silly question, but kind of the state of the world that we're in, because it is messy, it is complex, it is volatile. Um, Given all of that, like, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing business leaders today? And then we can get into like how we can start to approach those.
I mean, I think somewhere in the late aughts, early 2010s, there was a pretty clear observation that the level of business complexity was increasing, right? You had
Yeah.
increased technology changes in regulatory scheme, globalization was a big driver. Digital transformation was really affecting organizations at that time. That's a short list, but those are all pretty big factors in increasing complexity. And a lot of the response to that was to increase organizational complexity, which is a
Hmm.
natural thing. You think everybody's going to take on more lists, more special initiatives. We've got to up our skills. We've got to transform. And change is hard for humans.
Yeah.
It generally is. The old wisdom from John Kotter is most change initiatives fail, and they
Yeah.
usually fail for reasons of vision and communication. I mean, it is kind of in this wheelhouse. That was all before a pandemic. That was all before, kind of what we're seeing today. And if you look, I think, looking across the big surveys in our space at studies done by PwC, Ernst and Young, and Deloitte, you'll see 65% of CEOs say they're concerned that geopolitical instability will disrupt their business strategy. 45% say their business will not be viable in 10 years if they don't reinvent it. And 60% are accelerating whatever business transformation efforts they have. Out of the other 40%, 39% say they're maintaining the business transformations that are underway. So it does seem like there's a lot on everybody's plates. That change is the new normal in many respects. And as they're grappling with all this complexity, the question really becomes how do you gain clarity in the midst of all this so that you can actually tell people with clarity, what are you supposed to do in this moment? How do you manage this? How do you give feedback? Everything that we know says that when you have something from a strategic standpoint kind of locked and loaded, you're going to learn tons from what it means when you actually implement it. It's going to take on a different character. It's going to look differently. People are going to have different experiences with it. You're going to have to adapt and adjust. And so, I think that's something that organizations are dealing with both internally and externally. How do you develop, the platforms and the engagement strategies to, make sure you're talking to the right people and, talking to customers in the right way, all that
Hmm.
stuff that drives your business. But then internally, how do you make sense of the transformation for people, give them clarity on what they're supposed to do, what good looks like, all of that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a lot, right?
It
That's
is
a
a lot.
lot.
And
That's a
it's
lot for
like,
any leader, to be juggling, in addition to just like all of the basic operational stuff that they have to do just to like keep the doors open and keep their teams running, and just all the things that you just have to do each and every day just to run your business and to run your teams, right?
it's hard and it's different, right? That's the piece that if you think about how we tend to think about organizations historically, it's more built, they were built for industrial age. There's the assembly line mentality. You're creating products, not services, and it's sort of production based.
Yeah.
The focus of decision making is hierarchical, top down. Like, here's what we need to do. And you go out and most organizations have been built on some sort of a industrial militaristic model because that's
Yeah.
the model that they've had historically. The scarce resource in an industrial age is capital, right? Now it's talent. The
Hmm.
decision making process historically being top down, now it's collaborative. The interaction costs of an industrial age, you want to minimize those. You're not trying to interact with a lot. You want to get it as efficient and productive as possible. Today, the interaction costs are low. Can I send you an email? You want a text? I can probably put something on Snapchat for you. So you're seeing all of these things that upend the historical models of what leadership looked like, the expectations around stakeholder transparency. I mean, we never knew what happened to most organizations. Now we've got CSR reports. We've got trade publications out there digitally for everybody. And I think probably the most important piece is that the skills that we used to covet were technical skills. But
Hmm.
now what people say they're looking for, and there's a very good future jobs report that the World Economic Forum puts out, their critical thinking skills, their strategy skills, their analytical skills. That's what's in high demand. People who can reason through these complex problems and try to, distill them down to what actions are needed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot to juggle, a lot to balance. We need those. Sometimes they're called soft skills. They're called people-oriented skills. I like to call them the kind of more durable skills, especially in the age of machine learning, AI, advanced robotics, etc. Like the durable skills that are more, human centered, like they're less replaceable. I think those are the ones that are critical thinking oriented. They're the ones that are more creative. These are the EQ type skills. These are the ones that fortunately I think we know we need more of, and these are the ones that are really hard to replace with chat GPT or whatever. So I think that's exciting. That's encouraging given the state of technological advances, which is another key driver in what we need in the next 10 years for leadership. Um, but it's still a lot to juggle. It's a lot to balance. And so it's going to be taxing. It's going to be hard. I think it's hard today to be a leader in an organization as it's ever been. We're also dealing with like a loneliness epidemic, mental health epidemic, just all the stuff, right? It's just hard, right? So we can establish that it's not for the faint of heart. It's going to be a challenging thing, and if you're going to dive on in, just know that, like you said, kind of the old militaristic, authoritarian, top down kind of style that maybe you saw in the past or that you see portrayed in the media, in the movies and TV, like that doesn't work. That just isn't going to work in the modern age or as we move into the future. And so you're going to have to reinvent yourself, perhaps, or reinvent your organization to be more agile, to be more effective. And that in and of itself is also going to be challenging, especially if the organization you're in is resisting that kind of a change. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're hitting on two key things. You yourself may have to change, and your organization may have to change. And the likelihood is it's both, and probably in similar ways. So individual leaders, you're right. We were supposed to get the stone tablets from on high. Here's what you do, and everybody then go do them. Honestly, leadership, it's very clear, is taking on a different type of modality. Yeah, I think, you need conviction. That's one of the things that I've realized over the years is you can't get away from having, a real sense of why you're here, your purpose, your mission, that sort of thing. That's
Hmm.
that's non-negotiable, right? But the how
Hmm.
of that mission is, and how it gets implemented, is actually very much up to negotiating because nobody knows how to do it in this age. And by the way, if you
Hmm.
figured out how to do it, wait 5 minutes because the rules will have changed in some respects, and you'll have to
Hmm.
learn new skills and the rest of it. We value skills around curiosity and rigor and problem
Yeah.
solving, and really trying to cultivate those pieces of things because those are continuous things. And I don't think that's a mountain you ever get to the top of. I think it's something that you continue the climb throughout your life. If you're passionate about those things, it'll serve you really well individually. How you cultivate that more broadly as an organization requires a lot of discipline. I mean, we are programmed to believe that we have the right answer
Yeah.
instead of thinking that the answer itself is kind of fungible, very much subjective. It depends, and you need a lot of, a more experimental model. We have a hypothesis. We've gathered all the data about the hypothesis. We feel really strongly like this is the right thing to do. Now we go out and we try the thing. Is it yielding the results that we want? We can closely monitor it. It goes up, it goes down. We think we're on the right trajectory. Oh, wait, something has to change. That's the nature of things today because there isn't, there's so much complexity. They're very much crowded marketplaces. Even innovation
Hmm.
itself, you would think everyone's going to just jump on board, but it's often subject to people really understanding the new technology, being able to use it, how well is it applied to your, a consumer experience and the rest of it. It's not just that we built a better widget. So I feel like that's a lot for us to all take on now. It's hard from the investments, seed funding end all the way through the changes that happen in global multinational organizations. But all of it does come down to, what are we trying to do, and how do I have good insights into that, and then develop programming that you can actually do, that sort of try things, test, learn, and then scale.
Yeah. So, with what your firm does around strategy and communications, how can we leverage those kind of mindsets and tools to help us face this broad array of challenges, this complexity? Like, what do you do when you go into an organization, you have a leader that's kind of overwhelmed and frustrated and, perhaps terrified,
Well,
given
it's
all of this?
interesting. They usually don't show up and say those things about their experience. They show up with a business problem. The business problem, the conversation around that, to me, that's the key thing. I mean, we've definitely I think we focus on the problems and the challenges, in the conversations with our clients and try to figure out what are we trying to pin down? What are we trying to run to ground? What will success looks like? But a lot of times those other pieces of what's keeping them up at night really do show up, and you have to deal with those things as well. I think so much, communications, we often think of that as we're going to like program a thing and we're going to hit send on it, it goes out in the world. But half of it should be listening. And so we start out with that curiosity, with those questions, what are we really dealing with here? And usually in the process of that, we'll get a good sense of, the things that are emotionally resonant and might speak to either a fear, an insecurity, a concern. They're very tangible. They do come down to most of the time, does the organization have the skills? Do we have the right strategy and the rest of it? Our sense is that, it's mostly if we can cultivate a collective decision-making process, get the right people in the room and sort of
Mhm.
facilitate, a really strong problem definition. I think it's the quote that is accurately attributed to Albert Einstein, but he said, if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes figuring out what was wrong and 1 minute implementing, whatever I thought the right solution was. And I think that's really smart. From my standpoint, we don't spend enough time really thinking about the problem from multiple dimensions, making sure we have a really crisp articulation of that thing, and then figuring out what we want to do about it. So, though,
Well,
I think,
can I add to that? I
yeah,
mean,
please.
that comes back to kind of the interdisciplinary approach and kind of a systems, like a holistic approach to understanding complex problems that I think sometimes gets lost. Like, people don't always approach it that way. So when you don't take that kind of an approach, often what you end up doing is playing whack-a-mole with the problem, right?
Mhm.
So you're not really understanding the deep-rooted problem or the deep-rooted issue. You're just looking at the symptoms and you end up playing whack-a-mole. So you end up trying to respond to one symptom, you do something to intervene, you kind of fix that symptom, and it just pops up somewhere else. And so I completely agree. Like, trying to really take the time to truly understand the complexity, the nuance, the interconnected issues around the problem at hand. That takes a lot of time. It takes more patience. It takes some real diligence, I think, to do. And sometimes clients, it takes some persuasion, to say, hey, it's worth it. It's really worth it to take the time to do this. Um, it'll pay off in the long run because you're going to spend less wasted time chasing your tail. But ultimately you're going to get at really the root cause. It's like the iceberg analogy, like you only see the top 10-20% of the iceberg, but it's really that 80-90% underneath that's what's going to wreck the ship and sink the ship. So you got to really understand what's below the surface. That's what's hard to see. And unless you're really taking the time to really deeply understand the core issues, you're going to miss it, right? So sorry, I just wanted to kind of chime in and share that.
No, but that's good. I mean, first of all, it's a great observation. Secondly, it's the job of a good facilitator to really get at that what's underneath the surface business. I mean, if you hire us or frankly any firm to try to work on a strategy problem or work on a, particular market problem that you may have or something about the positioning of your brand or something like that, there's lots of different approaches to it, but I think you have to be able to step back and say, did we really get at it? Did we really talk about the
Yeah.
real issue? That's where I think there's value in having an objective third party out there instead of trying to be the boss and trying to facilitate all those conversations. It limits your effectiveness. If you're a leader and you're trying to solve all this and the rest of it, ultimately it's very hard to gather everybody around the table, say,
Mhm.
here's what our goal is, and also be the decider on all of the issues that come up in the course of the conversation. That's just too much to juggle, I think. So you need a partner who's really going to listen and help your team, kind of deal with the right questions. I think over the years, I mean, look, anybody who's worked with me would tell you, I definitely have an ego, but I've learned over the years that it's not particularly helpful, and you just have to sublimate that and really try to. Your job is to be in service of the conversation and service of the problem, and
Yeah.
just keep asking, because it's really not about you. It's very much about that team, and hopefully that team has the right insights. You can deal with things if people aren't really contributing or focused or performing, you can have those conversations. But for the most part, people are well intentioned. They're dealing with what you said earlier, way too much complexity, a lot of things that weren't necessarily what they signed on for or thought they'd be dealing with. And they need, a little help in sort of navigating their way through it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So to have a more strategic mindset, to really be committed to more open, transparent communication, all of that's going to be really, really important. What are some of the other types of, these soft, durable, crucial leadership skills that you see as being vital moving into the next decade?
Well, so I mentioned the piece about conviction, and that's a critical.
Yes, yeah,
But then once you have that, you've got to be in a place where you can bring empathy to people, and I think frankly empathy to strategy at the end of the day.
hmm hmm
Really take that outside in view, or understand, embrace that outside in view, even if it tells you things you don't necessarily want to hear. There has to be kind of built-in listening components over the course of things where you're getting inputs from people. I love it when I hear about people who are managed by walking around, but just
Yeah.
creating forums for feedback, creating those touch points with people so that you're not in some way isolated. I think the best leaders find ways to reach outside the center and go to the edge of the organization, meet with customers, see people in the sales force, understand what's actually happening on the ground. I think there's a critical part about flexibility and vulnerability that you have to embrace. Vulnerability isn't weakness, by the way. It's actually just the ability to sort of put yourself out there and again deal with empathy as an important leadership priority, and then
hmm
do with that what you will. And I think some of the things that are needed right now, a sense of self-awareness, those are hard to come by too. I think if there are critical danger spots that people are probably not prioritizing enough, or maybe they are, it's just they may be thinking about it much more broadly. It's this tendency toward misinformation and disinformation,
Yeah.
because look, you're going to have to communicate, continuously about things that you're trying to do as a leader. Once you're tired of talking about it, typically people are just starting to hear you. And,
Right.
being on the lookout for ways in which that's getting distorted or played back to you, and it's that old game of telephone, and it's changed somewhere along the way, and it's no longer what you intended to put out there. Those sort of, practices are really, really important.
That's something I see all the time too. And I get it. I get, senior executives who are in the meetings where things are discussed all the time. Um, in their mind, they're talking about these issues all the time. And they're sick of talking about it. They think it's been discussed ad nauseum. They think it should be crystal clear to everyone that everyone should understand. The problem is just because they discuss it in meetings all the time doesn't mean it's trickling down the vine to everyone else at the same frequency, right? It doesn't always get to the end of the row. And like you said, even if they are discussing it all the time, and even if it is getting disseminated all the time, people aren't always listening all the time, or they're not understanding all the time, and it takes a lot of communication until people are really paying attention, really understanding. And so I see so often leaders just getting so frustrated because they feel like they've communicated or over communicated even, and and then the line workers don't get it, or they don't understand, or they start filling in the gaps of where they aren't they don't feel like the communication's coming, and so they start making stuff up or gossiping or whatever, right? And the leader's thinking, no, like I told them, I sent an email 3 months ago that explained this very thing. I'm like, dude, that's not enough. And to us, we chuckle about that, and we laugh, but I think leaders fall into that trap all the time, and it's not because they're nefarious. It's not like they're trying to like sit behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room thinking about how to like hide everything from their employees, but they don't realize, how extra, they need to go in terms of trying to over communicate.
Well, look, I mean, communication is a very messy process.
Yeah.
It's linear, and we use narratives a lot to try to, create this clearer sense of, problem, solution, where we're all headed, what you can do to support it. That works in a narrative a lot more easily than it works in bullet points on a 3x5 card. I think what we don't necessarily understand in talent and in, within organizations is people are hardwired to around narratives, but also to do something called sense making. So sense making
Yeah.
is a very human activity. There's a lot of research on this. I think it's a fascinating area. And here's what it is basically. Your sense making is I have a story that explains the world around me. I have a mental model of how things work together or don't. And then I gather data about what I'm seeing. I take the communication I just got from my boss at 9 a.m. Monday email, and I run it through that filter of sense making. And I might change my mental model. I might, like things may evolve. I might see that thing as an input that is completely consistent with what's been said before. I might see it as dissonant. It might break up my sense making. I might reshape my worldview based on this. I think we need to recognize that people are doing that. We're not sort of AI or automatons that are like, thank you for the input, and now I will go and do that thing. We're always assessing our mental models about what's happening around us. And if you can design communications that recognizes that that's happening, might require you to over communicate, require more transparency than you're comfortable with or what would have thought was needed historically. Those pieces will really serve you well. Recognize you're not the only person trying to make sense of the situation that you're in and figure out what to do about it. Often
Yeah.
your line people are doing it. They may be doing it kind of at a different level. They may have a narrower view of the world or frame of experience with it, but it's the same process. And so support that process. Listen to them, offer information that reinforces the way you're looking at the world or the way the organization does. Be open to information that suggests you might have something wrong about it. That's certainly true too. But that continuous communication problem, don't get tired of saying it because again, they're just starting to hear you. Is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Mike, this has just been a fantastic conversation. We could go on, I think, for hours, but I do note the time. I probably do need to let you go and get on with your busy day. So, as we start to wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can get connected with you and your team, and give us the final word on the topic for today.
Absolutely. So you can reach me at mike@orangefiery.com. That's orange like the fruit, fiery like the passion. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And, I think we're just in an evolutionary moment when it comes to leadership and the nature of the economy. It's not going to change. I think these are things that if we were to fast forward, we're probably going to still be talking about these things. You and I didn't touch much on AI, but, there's a lot of misconceptions about the role of
Yeah.
that and the technology change that's coming. And I think these skills that we're talking about today are only going to become more important rather than less important in the world, that's coming. So appreciate the conversation that we had. We definitely could continue. I hope others, will continue that conversation as well. It's really critical.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Mike. It's just been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Mike and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.